All right, so it's a beautiful day here in Florida. Cold though. This is way colder than Florida usually is, but that's not the point of this video. I'm all bundled up, so we should be fine. I had a friend that I've actually known for like 40 years, most of my life, and he sent me a message as if he was a first-time subscriber to my channel, didn't know me, and it was a very sincere question. And basically, in a nutshell, and I could put up the actual text here that he sent me, but in a nutshell, he said, as a new subscriber that doesn't have pro equipment, how do you approach doing photography with, say, an iPhone or an Android phone? And is that a viable thing? He didn't exactly say that, but basically, can you do professional photography or high-end photography with your smartphone? And the answer is yes, for sure. In fact, most of the time when I'm doing these videos, like right now, I'm just using my iPhone because it's convenient. And that's the big thing about phones these days, is everybody has a camera in their pocket. Everybody can be a professional photographer to some degree. And that's going to be a little controversial because most professionals would not use their iPhone or their Android phone to get pro level stuff, but you could. The principles of photography remain the same no matter if you are using a standard camera or your iPhone, your Android, point and shoot camera, whatever. The concepts are the same. And I think the problem where people think that you get something special out of this versus the camera and stuff like that is there are dials and knobs and stuff on here, whereas on your phone there really isn't, but there could be. So there's a ton of applications out there that will make it to where you could control every aspect of the camera that's built into your phone. And that's one of those things that you could really change the dynamics of your photo if you take control of it and don't let the AI that's built into your phone control everything. Because remember, if the camera is on auto, you're not actually the photographer, the camera is. You're just telling it when to be a photographer. But if you take control over the settings, whether it's a camera phone or pro level DSLR, disposable camera, whatever, if you could figure out a way to control those settings, you're going to be able to get to the creative side of photography. So I'm in a area that I've wanted to come shoot at for a long time, but unfortunately there's not a whole lot of action here, but great place for some potential for photos in the future. And that's where having your smartphone comes into play, is you always have that in your pocket, so you could take some reference pictures and remember what you got going on. So the basics of photography in general, if you want to actually be in control of your pictures, is to be able to control your exposure. And the exposure is going to be something that you can control with your smartphone. You just have to actually do more than hit the button on the front of the phone. Everybody has a smartphone, and that's what most people use on a day-to-day basis. So how would you use that kind of in a professional manner or to get better results? Even beyond that, like, when do you make the choices to, say, use a 1:1 crop or 4:5 or a panoramic, so on, etc.? The simple answer to that question is it doesn't matter what camera you're using, whether it's a smartphone or pro camera. Those decisions are creative decisions in your head. It's not the camera that makes those decisions, it's you. And there is no right or wrong on that. So when you're using said camera, whether it be your smartphone or DSLR, your film camera, or your mirrorless, those are choices that you see in your head. nobody can get in here except for you. And so that's when those choices happen. And when you make those choices, that's where your art truly will shine. Many times I have to ask myself those same questions in my head, like, I wonder if I should do this in a square crop or maybe something more cinematic like 16 by 9. I don't know, sometimes I picture it one way, and then when I go to the editing board, whether it be editing on my phone or editing at my desktop, I will literally just play around with a couple different crops and stuff. So to answer that part of the question, it doesn't matter if it's on a cell phone or if it's with a camera. You either make that decision ahead of time because you have some sort of vision, or in post you start playing around and you're like, wow, this actually looks better reframed this way. Some of the best photographers or cinematographers, they don't know what they're going after until they've seen the product themselves. Sometimes it takes seeing it twice. You do the picture or the video, and then afterwards you're like, man, I wish that I would have been a little more over on the right, or this or that, or whatever. As long as it's in the frame, you can reframe it. Many times I have to ask myself those same questions in my head, like, I wonder if I should do this in a square crop or maybe something more cinematic like 16 by 9. I don't know, sometimes I picture it one way, and then when I go to the editing board, whether it be editing on my phone or editing at my desktop, just play around with a couple different crops and stuff. So to answer that part of the question, it doesn't matter if it's on a cell phone or if it's with a camera. You either make that decision ahead of time because you have some sort of vision, or in post you start playing around and you're like, wow, this actually looks better reframed this way. Some of the best photographers or cinematographers, they don't know what they're going after until they've seen the product themselves. Sometimes it takes seeing it twice. You do the picture or the video, and then afterwards you're like, man, I wish that I would have been a little more over on the right, or this or that, or whatever. As long as it's in the frame, you can reframe it. It's not really the camera that's the important thing. It's what your eye is going to pick up that others don't see. So if you look around at some of this texture here, and if I put the model behind me, then there could be some interesting lines that will lead me to the model. It wouldn't matter if I had an iPhone or a regular camera. Nobody can tell what you shot it with. And a good example right now is, I really like the movie 28 Days Later. Then they had a movie to follow up 28 Weeks Later. And now they're just coming out with a movie called 28 Years Later. And that movie was filmed on an iPhone, or probably lots of iPhones. It just goes to show that you can shoot with anything. It's what's inside here that's more important. I think people assume you have to have this to get the shot. Really, this works just fine. Find interesting looks. So here is just downtown. We're just in a little alleyway. You can see the buildings over there. It's kind of like a courthouse building. But if I just turn around, now it looks like I'm in some real dingy area. And I was just keeping my eyes open. And then with some creative adjustments on the camera, I can make this background go dark and make it a very cinematic looking piece. And again, it wouldn't matter if I'm using my iPhone, my Android, little point shoot camera, or a full pro setup. It's what's interesting in the frame that's important. So to answer my friend Tom's questions, like how do I come up with what I'm going to use, what gear I should be shooting for, what creative choices, what leads me to the creative choices of shooting in a specific frame, and so on, etc. That all happens in your head. It doesn't happen in the equipment. So go out there and shoot with an iPhone, go out there and shoot with an Android, go out there and shoot with an old film camera, whatever you can afford or that is handy, and make it happen. You don't have to get the latest and greatest gadget. I mean, if I look here, I'm right downtown, but if I just walk right over here and go right here, now all of a sudden I have an interesting angle, and it looks like I'm somewhere that maybe I'm not. Maybe if I come here and film, looks like I'm at some sort of cathedral or, you know, something like that. And obviously, you know, framing is going to change everything and all that, but I'm just with my iPhone walking around, and you know, I'll probably take some pictures with it and be able to show you guys that you could get some really cool, aesthetically pleasing things with your iPhone, and nobody's going to go, oh, did you take that with your phone, or did you take that with this? They're just going to go, oh, that's a cool picture, or not. It's either going to captivate people or not. Sometimes when I'm showing people like a portfolio of some of my pictures, like this weekend I was at a bar at an event, and I was trying to show a person I was talking to some of my photography. They're like, man, that's really good. Do you just shoot that with your phone? And of course the answer was no. I have a Canon R5 that I shoot with. In their mind, because I was showing it to them on their phone, they assumed it was all done on the phone. And so today's world, it's not so odd to shoot with your phone. You know, everybody has a phone, and yeah, why not? Let's get creative. Let's get artsy. Here's another example. As you can see, I'm just right downtown here, but I walk into this little alleyway, and look how cool this is. Got this really cool gate here. I could take and pose a model right here and get some really, really cool shots. And I'll probably come back here, and now that I know that this is here, and take some stuff with my wife or another model. Definitely get some really cool stuff in there. Don't get fixated on what gear you're using. Get fixated on what you're trying to capture. If the question is what framing I should use, what settings I should use on my camera, and so on and so forth, those are creative choices that you make, and experimentation is the key. Trying to decide whether or not to use your iPhone or a pro camera, a lot of times it's just ego that makes that decision, not necessarily an artistic reason. It's literally, oh, I spent, you know, $4,000 on this camera, I'm going to try and get my money out of it. And that's a good reason to use that pro equipment, but you know, I spent like $1,200 on this iPhone. I also want to get good use out of it. So I don't think that the quality is going to be the question and matter. It's really the creative choices. As I walk through the city, you know, a lot of times I'll just try and find something interesting to shoot. If there's nothing interesting to shoot, it doesn't matter if you have an iPhone or a Canon R5. At the end of the day, the choices still come down to creativity and opportunity. Sometimes the opportunity is just not there. You could have the best equipment in the world, and if there's nothing interesting to shoot, then it is what it is. But if you have subpar equipment and there's lots of opportunity, do you choose to not shoot? And the answer is no. Shoot away. Use your iPhone, use your Android, use your disposable camera. Do whatever you can to capture that moment. Sometimes in post-processing, that's where the magic will happen, and sometimes it happens because of luck. You know, and that's just the bottom line and the truth behind it. It's not always the skill. Sometimes it's just being in the right place at the right time. I really love this question about, can you help me get the most out of the devices that I have? And the simple answer is yes. The devices that you have just need to get used. If you don't have the newest mirrorless camera, that's okay. The one that's in my hand, the iPhone that I'm using to film all this, is also one of the latest, greatest inventions. I think we take it for granted. A lot of times people are like, oh, someday I'm going to get a pro camera, or someday I'm going to do this, or someday is not a day of the week. My wife put that up on her Facebook and Instagram a week or two ago, and I thought, you know what? That's 100% correct. Someday is not a day of the week. That means it's never going to happen. Tomorrow, I'm going to do this and don't follow through, then tomorrow never happens. See where I'm going with this? But if you say Tuesday, January 29th, I'm going to start shooting with my iPhone, and you follow through with that, then you're using your equipment. I struggle a lot of times because I've spent a lot of money and a lot of time on gear, and sometimes that gear is just right in my pocket. It's this iPhone that I'm carrying around and doing this little video on. I forget that it has so many options just right there, just waiting for me to capture them. Make the choice to actually use what you got. If you have a Canon R5 Mark II with a 28-70 lens and a cage and a battery pack and filters and everything else, you're carrying around $10,000 worth of stuff in your hand. But if you're not clicking the button, you just wasted the money. Now, if you're carrying around an iPhone and you're shooting every single day in every way possible, then you're actually getting your money's worth and you're creating art. And that's what you should be doing, is creating art. And there are manual creative controls you could do on there. There's also things you could do after the fact. One of the questions that my buddy Tom asked is like what software to use if you're on the go and you have just your iPhone or just your Android, or there's a million apps out there and they all basically do the basic same thing. First and foremost, you're trying to recreate or polish what you did create within that software. What you saw at the scene, whether or not it was really the way it was or was in your mind, but you knew that you could darken the scene, make it dark and moody, or you could over brighten everything. Like right here, if I have that sun behind me, I could blow out the background. Those are creative choices that don't matter what you're using, what gear you have, it all works the same. A smartphone works exactly the same way as regular camera. The difference is there's some AI functionality into smartphones to try and get people the best quality results that they could get with the least amount of thinking. Whereas with a regular camera, they don't really have that. So you have to manually adjust those things. That doesn't make you a better photographer just because you understand how to manually change your exposure. If you can't compose something right, it doesn't matter what you're using. iPhones, Androids, and all that, with the AI that's built into them, they are trying to deliver the best quality product. And they do give you the ability to manually adjust things. Jump onto the Play Store or the Apple Store or whatever, and just download a couple of the free apps that will allow you to adjust things. There's like Lightroom Mobile that is basically an extension off of Adobe Lightroom, which a lot of professionals would use. The basic functionality is exactly the same. If you're using your iPhone and you download an app that you could do some post-processing on, then you could continue the process of photography, and it'd be similar to a dark room. Like I said, the cameras are all basically working the same way, but then the aftermath also works the same way as it used to in the old days when there was dark rooms. But the principles at hand are exactly the same. So if I want to lower the exposure, I can. If I want to raise the exposure, I can. If I want to take down the highlights, you could take that down. So the other part of Tom's question was basically getting the most out of your smartphone, And like I said, it doesn't matter if it's an Apple, an Android, a Google, or whatever else you're using. If it's got a camera on it and it can capture a picture, getting the most out of it really comes down to you using it and experimenting with the functions that you could use. So one example would be built into my iPhone, I could touch the screen and pull down the exposure and make something darker. You could also go the opposite direction and make things brighter. That's built into the camera app. Sometimes it'll be easier and you'll get better results than others, but until you start playing around with the sliders, you just won't really know what's possible. A lot of times people will look at a picture that I've taken and they'll say, wow, what were your settings? And they think that there's some sort of magic. And I laugh because they forget one thing. They weren't there during that picture, so they don't know what the light was like, what the mood was like, what the atmosphere was like. All that goes into how I make my decision on what my picture is going to look like. So a lot of times I might take a picture and I'll look back at the settings and think, man, I wish that I would have shot at a better exposure, or I wish I would have done this, or I wish I would have done that. And the fact of the matter is after the fact, I could fix some of that stuff. I could do it in post. I could go through and lower the exposure to get a more moody feel, because that's what I saw at the moment. But when you're running and gunning and you're just trying to capture stuff, sometimes it doesn't matter what your settings are, you just needed to capture the picture. So unfortunately, when I was walking around downtown, there wasn't a lot to shoot. There were some random homeless people, and there was a couple of things here or there that maybe could have been great to shoot, but I chose not to shoot. And that's another important thing to consider is when you're out shooting, how is it going to impact other people? And if you're being intrusive, taking pictures of somebody that's maybe having a rough time, you know, maybe it's just not the best to do. So I chose not to really take a whole lot of pictures and just talk about the question at hand. And if you go out on the days that you don't feel like it, you're gonna have more opportunities than obviously just picking and choosing when to go out. Like, oh, I feel great today, I'll go out and shoot. Well, that isn't always the case. For example, today I was totally into going out and shooting and trying to find some stuff, and there just wasn't anything going. Another day I might go out, not feel it, just not be in the mood, and capture the best, you know, capture some gold. And then sometimes you'll see things that are happening before your eyes and you don't have time to go grab your pro setup. And that could be, you know, in any form of photography, but a lot of times for candid shots, you know, I see something happening, I have to just start shooting right at that moment, and I don't have time to dial in the camera settings and this and that. And that's where having an iPhone or Android or any smart device like that comes in. Maybe you only have a GoPro. Maybe you don't even have a smartphone, and you have an old GoPro lying around, or some, you know, knockoff action camera. But I'm going to go out and I'm going to shoot with it as if it's my pro camera. And I do the same thing with my smartphone. I do the same thing with my pro cameras. And if I'm out with other people and they have different camera setups than me, I approach it the same way. I take those cameras and try and capture something that is unique to me. I think a lot of people get discouraged when they see somebody walking around with this and they assume this is what makes the picture. They don't realize that that smartphone that they have in their pocket can make the same picture. It's the person behind the camera, not the camera. And I've said that for years and years and years. And a lot of it back in the day was because I couldn't afford that top of the line camera. And then as I got better and better cameras, yes, it was easier for me to get better pictures, but it wasn't because of the camera or the lens or any of that. It was because my knowledge was growing. If I would have started with the best of the best, I wouldn't have gotten anything better than I got with my beginner setups, because I was a beginner, you know, and it's okay to begin with an iPhone. You don't need to shoot with a $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 setup. It doesn't make any sense. If you don't know the functions of the camera, it doesn't matter how expensive it was. I watched a couple of cinematographers talk about that recently. They were talking about getting, you know, $100,000 cinema camera setups and how they were actually getting better work done with their cheap setup because they had mastered that cheap setup so well. So the creativity is within you. It's not within how much you've spent on the gear. And then sometimes when you get that super expensive gear, you think, well, you know, I got this $5,000 camera, it better take good pictures.